In 1941, a group of psychiatrists at the Tavistock Clinic saw that the right questions were asked in Parliament in order to secure the means to try new measures. As a result, they were asked to join the Directorate of Army Psychiatry, and did so as a group. Tavistock Institute. They wind you up because they know what makes you tick. Tavistock Clinic studied shell shock, post-traumatic stress in World War I but switched to developing psychological warfare in 1922. Rather than helping traumatized soldiers, it calculated their breaking points. Tavistock shock doctrine now permeates global life. Their social engineers are a who's who: Freud, Jung, Adler, Melanie Klein, Wilfred Bion, Edward Bernays, Eric Trist, A.K. Rice, Eric Miller, Aldous Huxley, R.D. Lang, and more. Tavistock sent German-born psychologist, Kurt Lewin, to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1945 to establish the Research Center for Group Dynamics. In the United States, Lewin is the founder of social psychology. The center moved to the University of Michigan in 1948, where it became the Institute for Social Research, and continued to co-opt legitimate psychosocial research and exploit mass psychologians split off a policy-making, mother of all think tanks, publicly claiming to research and direct groups and organizations while it continued massive covert operations in social engineering. The think tank registered as a charity in September 1947, in London, England. It devised and spread interdisciplinary models of group relations and training in management, administration and socio-politics. Promoting creativity and organizational policy, it remains an influential intelligence organization tied to MI6, CIA, Project Paperclip, German scientists, the Rockefeller Foundation, and cryptocracy. Founder, John Rawlings Rees, claimed, "Public life, politics, and industry should all be within our sphere of influence. If we are to infiltrate the professional and social activities of other people, I think we must imitate the totalitarians and organize some kind of fifth-column activity. We must aim to make it permeate every educational activity in our national life. We have made a useful attack upon a number of professions. The two easiest of them naturally are the teaching profession and the church, the two most difficult are law and medicine." Former MI6 intelligence officer, John Coleman, first exposed their covert activities with his insider knowledge in the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, shaping the moral, spiritual, cultural, political, and economic decline of the United States of America. The enemy is clearly identifiable as the Committee of 300, the Club of Rome, NATO, the Black Nobility, CFR and all of its affiliate organizations, the think tanks, and research institutes controlled by Stanford and, last, but certainly not least, the military establishment. Coleman includes the Eastern liberal establishment, aristocracy, its banks, insurance companies, giant corporations, petroleum cartels, foundations, communications networks, publishing houses, radio and television networks and the movie industry. Mission creep has penetrated organizations far beyond the TAVI, and they are scripting our wars, our lives and our future. As the power behind the think tank thrones, instead of doctoring the soul, the clone organizations systematically attack it. The consensual goals of mental health and group relations parted company. The promise became a curse. The world's most influential think tank, by names and images, are powers awakened, and reawakened. Golden Dawn. What if everything you were brought up to think about society, all layers of cultural meaning, about healing and freedom are wrong? What if someone was subverting your beliefs, ideas and values with behavioral tricks to use them against you? In The World According to Tavistock, social drivers are disguised as their exact opposites to create a worldview that is illusory, reinventing the world in distorted form. Tavistock invented what you should believe. It is no accident we have become victims of future shock in the long crisis, a battle for your soul. Ego is mental structure, not a separate entity from soul. Whether you view it psychologically or spiritually, soul is structured through ego development with mental forms, words and images. It can also be fragmented with them. We lose our soul when we lose our dreams. What appears progressive, nurturing or good, can have exactly the reverse effect. But seeing the world as it is, not as we are told or wish it to be, brings us closer to real solutions. Turning away from or denying the darkness doesn't make it go away. Embodying our collective shadow, Tavistock is a hydra-headed secret agent that runs rampant, aggravating the interconnecting set of global problems. How is the mind bent and toward what ends? The masses are bent through control of resources and the environment, mind control, massive manipulation, crisis and social turbulence. Non-profit foundations have teamed with corporate, military and governmental entities to form a covert control force. The art of war became a management problem. Unintended consequences result. Under the guise of prevention, they create oppression. Cultural psychology was used to assess the enemy mentality. The original Tavistockers didn't stop with the enemy and rewriting history. They spread those Tavistock method, theory and practice of mass mind control into all strategic institutions. Their systrat, turning reality inside out, had multiple vectors, unifying levels of strategy to produce fractal control effects. Once you learn how to organize behavior, joint optimization, you know how to disorganize it with value dilemmas in groups and international networks. Chaos theory describes increases in complexity. The contemporary environment is a turbulent field, in which the amount of disorder is increasing to the limit of a vortical state in which healthy adaptation is impossible. The talking cure became the signature of the Tavistock method, and a blanket solution, with psychotropic drugs, to mental distress. The character-building method is self-questioning and psychiatric investigation. While therapy gives empathy a mirroring face, it also substitutes a surrogate parent with sanctimonious certitude for self-care and self-regulation. When Tavistock pioneers began exploring the psyche, it was terra incognita. Now that once unknown ground is riddled with the twisted roots of Tavistock's insidious penetration and experimentation which has permeated the collective psyche. Modulating someone's internal state is a powerful form of control using the power of narrative, imagery and frequency. Conditioning replaces external constraint with internal compulsions on both essence and substance. Tavistock's goal is a subtle, sinister control agenda that no one engaging in therapeutic activities could imagine from surface appearances. Have we been unwittingly sleeping with the enemy, inducing trauma even as we try to heal it? The cure is a poison. Rather than healing the sick, Tavistock deliberately makes the healthy ill. Untrustable brain trust, what we traditionally have meant by human perception, vision, insight, ethical judgment, discriminating between reality and illusion, has been effectively shut down, almost surgically replaced by the virtual vision machine of the militarized imagination. We are suddenly rendered vulnerable to the new virtual myths about the supposedly hygienic character of post-human warfare. Arthur Croker Tavistock's tentacles are holographic feedback loops of physical, emotional, mental and spiritual control. The lies are different in each dimension of experience. Their backdoors and wormhole shortcuts among cultural institutions have created a stranglehold on global culture. Unpacking each association reveals widespread effects encompassing intelligence, military, government, NGOs, economics, infotech, mass media, philosophy, occult, religion, science, academia, psychology, psychiatry, medicine and zeitgeist worldview. Co-opting ancient occult principles, Tavistock took the healing principles of Freud and Jung and aimed it at mass psychology in a controlling way. The means mirror the early relationship of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who wound up with a 6-year nervous breakdown when Freud essentially brainwashed him. Freud displays a pattern of turning his heretical followers into mental cases, even suicides. Jung in 1913, Victor Tausk in 1919, Herbert Silberer in 1923, and Wilhelm Reich in 1927. Freud broke their personalities down, providing a model that his magical child, Tavistock, used as a modus operandi on many social fronts. Tavistock began with research on shell shock, or post-traumatic stress propaganda and applied mind control. They have broken down a whole country with collective ego death. They have used Jung's metaphysics to re-mythologize and spiritualize society, using the memes of hope and change as dope for the new age. Civilizations need a myth to live. Irrespective of national sovereignty, Tavistock's foundation ideology orchestrates archetypal battles of good and evil by featuring in all cultural domains toward totalitarian ends. Arguably in doing so, they have distorted civilization, morals, psychology, history and religion. They have seized a monopoly on human judgment. The equivalent Russian program is psychoecology, from the Psychotechnology Research Institute. Featuring includes 6 synergetic aspects: 1. Mapping acceleration, 2. Anticipating, 3. Timing, 4. Deepening the future, 5. Creating alternatives to the present, and 6. Transformation. Aspirational featuring and analysis includes environmental scanning, forecasts, scenarios, visions, audacious goals and understanding change and strategic issues. Trends identify key forces shaping the future. Environmental scanning includes global, local, political, economic, technological, environmental and social trends. Roadmaps help us visualize strategies and collaborative foresight. Paradigms underpin the assumed truths of our logic. Dreams and memes. Without Tavistock, there would have been no World War I and World War II, no Bolshevik Revolution, Korea, Vietnam, Serbia and Iraq wars. But for Tavistock, the United States would not be rushing down the road to disillusion and collapse. John Coleman: The geopolitical and psychosocial game of life is rigged. To understand mass psychology, you need to know the real rules of engagement. Their world is governed by appearance, not reality. There are so many global extinction stories on television now because life, as we have known it for the duration of mankind, is under grave threat of extinction. The energy shortage, rise of food prices, scandals in government, and unwinnable wars against ideas like ideologies of terrorism are the first harbingers of the approaching mega-crisis. There are 2 routes from here, that of stagnation and eventual total collapse, and that of flexibility and growth, which could lead to a golden age. Chaos theory reveals both catastrophe, bifurcation, and renewal are likely inevitable. The real crisis is this war conducted inside your head by those who do not have your best interests at heart, by those who program you for exploitation while robbing you of rights and freedoms. Events take place along a utopian, dystopian spectrum, which ranges in the individual from euphoria to dysphoria. Underlying forces are playing your underlying forces, modulating your moods like an emotional organ. Conflict, fear and trauma are used to manipulate and control individuals and whole populations. Drugs are ever more readily available, legally and illegally. The transnational drug, prostitution and child trafficking trades support even more black ops, social engineering, in other areas. Organized stalking and electronic torture protocols are hardcore social engineering devices. The depth psychology models of Freud and Jung, the inherent nature of the psyche and human response to trauma have been played against our dreams of a better tomorrow. Tavistock created protocols to deliberately initiate and manipulate breakdown and programming, in both individuals and in the masses. Reinforcing this with media manipulation has created a conformist society. Framing the narrative of world events, it has manufactured history according to its own agenda. It has done so with a mystique of authority, through a compartmentalized global network of think tanks and non-profit organizations, which promote the same agenda of social engineering, population control and exploitation. Spanning the entire socio-political spectrum, they have spread their shadow over the globe as an uninvited trance. Another Tavistock alumni, Edward Bernays, double-nephew of Freud, turned his understanding of mass psychology into the shameless public relations and advertising juggernaut of consumerism. Silent war. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. Bernays' covert forces are playing on your unconscious mind. With global hypnosis, they have made themselves the rudder on the ship of state, setting policy, advising and dominating governments, corporations, and the educational structure. The short list of Tavistock's fellow globalist institutions includes the Rockefeller Foundation, CIA, MI6, Stanford Research Institute, Brookings Institute, Rand Corporation, Club of Rome, Council on Foreign Relations, IMF, PNAC, Pilgrims Society, Wharton School, NASA, and World Bank. Probably the easiest way to understand the convoluted history and absorb the complex psychoecology of Tavistock's penetration of culture and the cryptocracy is to watch some of the classic videos that can be found searching the subject online. Relationships of certain individuals and groups are matters of public record. Tavistock tailors programs to specific situations as well as setting standards in psychiatry, psychology and organizational management. It declared itself the ultimate authority on mental health and human relations. Divergent thought is declared crazy or antisocial. Programs with proven historical contexts originating or rooted in Tavistock brain trust include War on Terror, War on Drugs, Total Information Awareness, Full Spectrum Dominance, Joint Vision 2020, Shock and Awe, New Left Basic English Propaganda, Narco-Capitalism, Social Engineering, Sistrit, and Open Government, and Infowar. You can't really wage war against an idea, but you can campaign for and against them. In their endless bag of demonic tricks we also find behavioral modification, mass brainwashing, buzzwords, memes, suppressed science, manufactured wars, counterculture, LSD, New Age, cults, ISMS, disinformation, false flag ops, crisis creation, postmodern apocalypse theory. Presence in absence, manufactured psychological shocks and stress, encounter groups, Aquarian conspiracy, corporate feudalism and more. There is a psychosocial war for your mind, your body, even your soul. By making their mental health guidelines and human relations practice the standard, Tavistock became the decentralized arbiter of what is considered sane and what is deemed crazy. But they have employed the devices of toxic interaction and deployed him against the populace. By framing reality, naming the issues and producing iconic imagery, they have sold us a media gloss that simulates and substitutes a big lie for truth. Too big to fail, and bailouts are recent examples. Dirty tricks include the double bind, crazy-making behavior, forced choice, dual reality and organized stalking to name a few. Since World War II, this psyop strategy has allowed them to achieve full-spectrum dominance of the cultural landscape. They are inside your head from the cradle to the grave, using every control mechanism known to behavioral science, creating and fulfilling your desires with programming and emotional manipulation. Everyone senses it at some level, but who does anything about it? Born again, mind-benders. We shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent. James Paul Warburg in the Bourne Identity 2002 to 2007 film series, a takeoff on the Tavistock-inspired CIA's MK Ultra program, hypno-patsy Jason Bourne learns how intelligence eats its own. As the series unfolds, we see how mind control and programmed assassins are used to steer socio-political reality, while concealing and erasing memory of the mind-bending puppet masters. Only the biggest lies are too big to fail. The irony is, in this sense, we the people, all born again. Not surprisingly, the fourth film of the franchise is on the way, and a first-person shooter video game is already here. The seduction, murder pups who pull the magic trigger on the smoking gun have perfected the art of hiding in plain sight in their magic kingdom. Tavistock is the rudder on the pirate ship of the state. They don't even care if we know how it works because plausible deniability has become irrelevant in the theater of cruelty that molds minds with metaphysics and the occult while shattering our perceptions. The secret of reality creation is that it's beyond your control, far out of reach of your wishful thinking. The new holy trinity of our warring instincts is money, sex, power. The god we learn to worship is gold, oil, drugs. Riding the coattails of the Manchurian Candidate, 1962, A.B. horror movie, The Mind-Benders, 1963, depicted Dirk Bogarde as the victim of British brainwashers who isolated, water-tanked him and destroyed his marriage. Mind-bender scientists discover that 8 nightmarish hours of water-tank isolation equates with 8 months of intense brainwashing. Apparently someone in Britain knew what was going on at Tavistock. The mind-benders break both the volunteers and their relationships, inducing dissociation. Freud proved that broken relationships and imposed sexual repression can be used as a weapon, spreading emotional contagion and arousing primitive emotions in targeted populations. Emotions can simultaneously be used to build entire mythic systems. Tavistock's time machine. All news is lies and all propaganda is disguised as news. Willy Musenberg. Just outside London, Tavistock Institute is the sloganeering nerve centre of a global cyber apparatus that attacks our collective conscious and unconscious relentlessly. Established after World War I, the original Tavistock Clinic developed psychological warfare for British intelligence. More than an international institution, Tavistock became a non-local community of practice, a dark, invisible college, the Castalia of the cryptocracy. Tavistock's grandmother is the drug empire of the British East India Company and theosophical esoterics, Alistair Crowley, Helena P. Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. Its grandfather is the open conspiracy of H. G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, Cecil Rhodes and Fabian Socialists. The Society for Psychical Research (SPR) helped create the Fabian Society. Tavistock is the paranoid child of the Leipzig and Frankfurt schools of critical thinking and behaviorism. The psychodynamics of Freud and Jung are its godparents. But Tavistock's birth mother was a whore, a propaganda front called Wellingen House, known as the Lie Factory. One of Plato's tricks was forbidding the question. His Republic is a blueprint for tyrannical systemic philosophical control. The big lie, a hypnotic propaganda technique, is rooted in Plato's noble lie, the myth knowingly told by the elite to maintain social control. We live in Luciferian duality. Using time as their fulcrum, Tavistock's explorations in crafting reality became exploitations, selling utopian idealism to the New Left and patriotic homeland security to the born-again right. Pitting them eternally against one another is a neocon racket that molds all political party themes. The game is collapsing the traditional world. They employ both religious and secular currents in the same way, playing both sides against the middle in a classical Hegelian dialectic. Grinding the gears of paradigm shift, a society of sheep must in time beget a government of wolves. Bertrand de Jouvenel. Turning great game strategies on the public. Tavistock's agenda transcends institutional boundaries, hoodwinking us about the nature of reality with stealth, secret, media, and cultural tactics while imposing and maintaining control through the collective psyche. The seat of power has switched from a pyramidal to a holographic power structure. Intelligence tricks are deployed from the heart of the machinery of state to engineer the consistent illusions of our psychosocial culture, an interactive fiction. The social glue of trust has dried and cracked, leaving less than enlightened self-interest in an "I'll get mine first" mentality. Tavistock is now selling downshifting income, aging lean and collective ego death through the razzle-dazzle of apocalyptic archetypes. Modulating someone's internal state is a powerful form of control using the power of imagery. Conditioning replaces external constraint with internal compulsions on both essence and substance. The destiny of individual freedom depends on maintaining critical ethical judgment and a clarity that can filter out propaganda and rebel against it. Too bad, even our rebellions are planned well in advance, orchestrated and controlled. The story must be continually upgraded to keep the audience engaged. Tavistock is a strange attractor in the global psychodynamic field. It has brought us all to the self-organizing state of criticality, the precipitous boundary of chaos and order. We need to develop filters against such psychic infiltration. In such radical crisis, the individual must courageously refuse to assent to totalitarian power. Cultural hegemony. The core of the belief in progress is that human values and goals converge in parallel with our increasing knowledge. The 20th century shows the contrary. Human beings use the power of scientific knowledge to assert and defend the values and goals they already have. New technologies can be used to alleviate suffering and enhance freedom. They can, and will, also be used to wage war and strengthen tyranny. In the 20th century, these technologies were used to implement state terror and genocide on an unprecedented scale. Ethics and politics do not advance in line with the growth of knowledge, not even in the long run. John Gray. Heresies. Forms of cultural hegemony include psychological, spiritual, emotional, political, social, military, economic, medical and intellectual oppression and domination. Certain research projects are suppressed by dogmatic science. Like any ideology, Tavistock asks us to believe its deceptive promises and refrain from questions about what they don't tell. Lies of omission control the highs and lows of our expectations and the controlled demolition of the boom and bust economy. To think otherwise may be painfully naive. Most of us don't expect them to manufacture ideologies and phony enemies to mobilize the masses. We don't expect them to engage in covert dirty tricks, secretly foment revolutions or use deceptive diplomacy to execute a secret, social and occult agenda. We can hardly believe anyone would actively work against our health and welfare, destroying the food chain, good air, water and earth, not to mention developing biological weapons. We don't expect them to engineer arrested development, family breakdown, homosexuality, abortion and the women's liberation movement. We don't expect them to use planning theory and pop culture to foster alienation and dysfunction. We don't expect them to poison the well of global society in their undeclared war on humanity. We must learn to see through what they do as coercion, using their occult techniques of crisis creation and management. Their initial project, Operation Research on Military Management Techniques, was turned on civilians. Authority for authority. Tavistock is an immersive process, a transnational interagency collaboration, whose research is best evaluated by its real-world phenomena, the cumulative effects of machinations, trend-spotting, memes, and propaganda. They look at effects, then find the causes to produce them. They begin with solutions and find the problems they solve. They create media and products to satisfy needs that don't yet exist. They shape the world by shaping opinion. Even sanitized, their programs have global repercussions. In quantum information theory, if all records of an event are decorrelated from it, then by definition there is no way to know whether this event has ever happened. This situation is indistinguishable from its not having happened. Our only defense is awareness and DIY mind control. That the torrent of information is manipulated to guide our motivations while engineering consensus by repackaging myths, memes and metaphors. In the 1960s, the Milgram experiment demonstrated the draconian perils inherent in authority overriding personal conscience to compliantly follow orders, to inflict psychophysical harm on others. The sun shines alike on torture and compassion. Multimedia quietly changes our thoughts and opinions, creating a mashup of fiction and reality, a friction that rubs everyone the wrong way. The magic circle of the hypnotic primetime television schedule holds all in its restrictive spell of dominion, with celebrity ringmasters honing their witchcraft. We stare blankly, enthralled with the train wreck of intelligence and common sense. While it captures the appearance of things, mimesis holds up an illusory mirror. Catharsis creates communal emotional discharge that orchestrates identification with group feelings. To Freud, catharsis was the traumatic transfer of a memory, memory, collectively, from the unconscious to the conscious. Though it effectively empties us of our own potentially meaningful creative content, the culture is addicted to it. Rather than purging our pathologies, emotional ventilation voyeuristically facilitates them. It evokes them with daily rituals. Simulation becomes second nature, like breathing. We are the Sims. First-person shooter games are transmodern scapegoating. What we discover on one channel becomes history on another. As one commentator put it, Armageddon is the new black. Prisoner's dilemma, crisis creation and human bondage. The technetronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Zbigniew Brzezinski, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technetronic Era, 1970. Everywhere is ground zero. Not reserving their techniques for the enemy, Tavistock spread their contagious theory and practice of mass mind control into all strategic institutions. Tavistock wrote the blueprint for global domination, a triumph of image over substance. The hydraulic model of tensions has given way to the field theory of full-spectrum domination. The holographic structure is everywhere contained in its fractal satellites, each of which contains the entire program and can take over where others fail. They wrote the book on propaganda, prognostication and profiling, the staples of the full-spectrum surveillance society. They have contrived history. Fractured facts mixed with fiction produces pulp fiction. The simulation substitutes for reality. An occult ritual is a play with audience participation that changes you in the alchemical process. Funded by British royalty, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, the federal government and Wall Street, they invoked the secret of transmuting infinite symbols of transformation into infinite power. Without wielding overt control, the Tavistock Blitz influences the direction and effects of virtually every human endeavor with political and psychological warfare through its web of interlinking institutions. Following the lead of the British East India Company, transnational drug money flows like the mother's milk of black ops politics. Through a twist of fate, the shaping of Tavistock became synonymous with the shaping of global culture by forcing unwelcome changes and seizing psychological control of the human race. The Brainwashing Institute has twisted our beliefs into their very opposites by collapsing our psychic boundaries. Now, we are permanently shell-shocked. When we lose our story, we lose our history. Holographic power structure, political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give the appearance of solidity to pure wind. George Orwell. The Tavistock agenda creates macro trends, such as the New Left, and militant activism as counterpoint to neocon manipulation through radical religious policies and bunkered militia mentality. It is a primary polarizing entity at work throughout all levels of society, playing both sides against the middle. It creates outside adversaries through propaganda and projection, such as distracting terror, drugs and media wars. Viable solutions simply aren't allowed and are actively suppressed. A Rockefeller grant gave birth to the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London in 1947. Tavistock joined with Kurt Lewin's Research Center for Group Dynamics (RCGD) at the University of Michigan the next year and began disseminating human relations literature, relating theory to practice, including promotion of change, engineering, consensus, mass persuasion, breakdown of cognitive structure, and overcoming resistance. Globalist change agents, countless people, will hate the New World Order, and will die protesting against it. When we attempt to evaluate its promise, we have to bear in mind the distress of a generation or so of malcontents. H.G. Wells, The New World Order, 1939. The cryptocracy is involved in the occult, alchemical processing, of mass consciousness by psychological manipulation. With the help of foundations and secret societies, experiments in world-shaping continue multimedia and military campaigns. The goal of social engineering is seeding and controlling megatrends so the masses live as controlled puppets, wage slaves of the ruling elite. Tavistock's agenda is used to create and topple governments. Entire populations are controlled through drugs and sophisticated psychological techniques, including group dynamics. Disciplines include anthropology, economics, organizational behavior, political science, psychoanalysis, psychology and sociology. They are selling collective ego death with apocalyptic visions. Any technique which breaks down the family unit, and inculcated principles of religion, honor, patriotism and sexual behavior, is used by Tavistock scientists as a weapon of control. Now a war of extermination is waged on the small American farmer through high-interest loans and bankruptcy. Corp agglomerate land trusts gain while our diet suffers. Futurist programs identify discontinuities and emerging dilemmas. Discontinuities challenge business as usual and dilemmas demand new ways of thinking about complex problems. Together, discontinuities and dilemmas provide a vista of new practices and points of view that shape tomorrow's organizations and today's choices. Over the years, Tavistock's healing emphasis changed until there was a sinister slant to the research in eugenics, political and cultural engineering by the mid-1930s. There are rumors of an earlier version of Tavistock, which trained Lenin, and later after World War I, Adolf Hitler, Hallet. With the outbreak of World War II, Tavistock operatives took effective control of the Psychological Warfare Directorate of the British Army, while its allied network in the United States embedded itself in the American psychological warfare apparatus, including the Committee on National Morale and the Strategic Bombing Survey. By war's end, the combined influence of Tavistock and of the former Frankfurt School operatives had created what Director Rees called a cadre of several thousand psychological shock troops and cultural warriors. Today the network numbers several millions around the world, and is the single most important factor in determining the design and content of mass media product. By World War II, Tavistock was a real MI6 agency and its stress-related techniques were well advanced. They knew how to relieve mental and emotional pain and also amplify it, physically and psychologically. In fact, Tavistock's recommendations for excessive use of force were used tragically by Winston Churchill in the terrifying firebombing of Dresden and Hamburg. Sigmund Freud was Tavistock's prophet and first director, followed by his daughter, Anna. Tavistock programs were used to program the post-war leaders of Germany's government, churches, schools, corporations, etc. from among the powers who were easy to manipulate. Research into the use of microwave weapons and their use for mind control, psychotronics, began in 1950s at the Tavistock Institute, one of Britain's leading psychiatric research establishments. The UK Institute was researching into ways of mind controlling the British population without them knowing. Its main US branch is in the University of Michigan. The same principles were used to create pop culture and counterculture, so even societal rebellion is a programmed trend to channel and discredit opposing energy. Freud's nephew, a principal at Tavistock Institute, Edward Bernays, is the godfather of propaganda and the engineered consent of Madison Avenue. He took Freud's principles of mass psychology and applied him to social exploitation, numbing and manipulation of the masses. He created consumerism. Games, scripts and rackets. Popular culture is engineered to brainwash each of us from cradle to grave. Trends and megatrends are manufactured, engineered by corporations. Nothing happens in politics or society by accident. The Nazis employed techniques outlined by Bernays in the book Propaganda, and later brought them to the US under Operation Paperclip, where they were picked up by CIA and subsequently morphed into mind control programs such as Cyborg Assassins and MK-Ultra. Similar programs were instituted in the USSR. In the wake of the Enlightenment, the notion of an intellectual elite arose. A distinguished social stratum can be traced far back into classical history. Elite classes of intellectuals or well-educated people emerged in most European countries. The intelligentsia, e.g., artists, mystics, psychologists, psychiatrists, scientists and teachers, engages in complex mental and creative labor directed into the development and dissemination of culture. Bohemians were the forerunner of what we can call the psychedelic intelligentsia, and today's New Age spiritual fusion. Utopian socialism is the philosophical root of modern socialist thought. Anyone can be a utopian socialist, but the trend emerged in the 19th century. From the mid-19th century onwards, other branches of socialism overtook utopianism in popularity. But groups such as the Fabians continued working their strategic agendas behind the scenes of perpetual class struggle. Societies are cyclic, always in a continual process of constructing themselves and destructing from within. Utopian socialists are forerunners of communal hippie life, intentional communities and cooperatives. Utopian nostalgia is exemplified in the Star Trek and Star Wars philosophy. Its dystopian reflection is The Matrix, the postmodern Brave New World where nothing is believable nor trustable. Quasi-socialist intellectuals created hypothetical visions of perfect egalitarian and communal societies without actually concerning themselves with the manner in which these societies could be sustained. Yet, they shared a dream, which for the world at large has become a mind control nightmare. And so, we medicate. Around the same time, CIA also spreads propaganda across the entire political spectrum through founding and funding front organizations. Name your poison, there will be, in the next generation or so, a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude, and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak, producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies. So that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it, because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. Aldous Huxley, Tavistock Group, California Medical School, 1961. Tavistock is married to Big Pharma by psychiatry. The paradoxical Greek word pharmakon can be translated as drug, which means both remedy and poison. In Plato's Pharmacy, Derrida traces its meanings in Plato's dialogues: remedy, poison, either the cure or the illness or its cause, filter, drug, recipe, charm, medicine, substance, spell, artificial color, and paint. The alchemists also call their elixir or panacea both a cure and a poison, describing the dangers of the interactive field experience, including failure to recognize trance states. Derrida notes, this pharmacon, this medicine, this filter, which acts as both remedy and poison, already introduces itself into the body of the discourse with all its ambivalence. Tavistock paints a picture of the world, simulacrum, textual trance, and we must embrace it. Because the pharmacon is artificial and comes from outside rather than from within, it always has side effects. When not treating a disease, a psychotropic becomes dope. The pharmacon is the paradoxical medium in which opposites are opposed and contradictory meanings play out. It is a war of opposites Freud saw as a life-death struggle and Jung saw as a death-rebirth mystery of cyclic passages and renewal. Rebirth is the mythic enactment of the one story, whose pattern is found in every narrative. Culture takes place in between the war of life and death. Those caught between two stages of development without clearly defined social identities feel marginal, excluded, without identity or influence. Outsiders occupy an edge realm of creative potential for new ideas and concepts and so pose a threat to the establishment. Relationships and social status are negotiated at the threshold. We are either ejected from or welcomed to the other side, submitting to the rules that of that place. At the threshold, one can also enter new territory. Outsiders live beyond roles assigned by law, custom, convention, and ceremonial. As visionaries, they question, expose, critique and redefine the central values of culture. Pharmakos, human scapegoat, or sacrifice.